Hello, and welcome to our webinar this afternoon titled Harnessing Technology to Support Proficiency-Based Learning. My name is Sarah Stefanich, and I'm here with my colleague Juanita Calvo, and we're very excited to spend the next hour and a half with you talking about proficiency-based learning and teaching and how we can use and leverage technology in the proficiency-based language classroom. So here's a bit of what we are going to see today. First, we'll start with a quick introduction and recap. And then we're going to take a look about what we mean when we talk about technology. From there, we're going to take a look at 3 core challenges and how technology can serve as a potential solution. And then we'll end with a section on tools in action and hopefully some time for Q&A. So let's go ahead and get started. You might have seen, noticed, or felt the fact that there is a current push at the moment to move towards proficiency-oriented teaching approaches within the world language field. And a lot of organizations and people within the field are working to support that and to provide resources to teachers. ASCL, for instance, recently put out a new book titled Proficiency-Based Instruction, Teaching Grammar for Proficiency. And Joshua Cabral, who is somebody we frequently collaborated with, has many recent podcast episodes on topics related to proficiency, and so on and so forth. And the reason why we have all of these resources is because we have to acknowledge that teaching for proficiency is not easy. First, it requires some specialized knowledge. If you are following ASCL standards and recommendations, then you need to have an understanding of the actual proficiency guidelines and levels, the modes of communication, the performance descriptors, what it really means for language learners in the theoretical sense and also in the practical sense. Like, what does this actually look like in the classroom? It can also require a little bit of reconceptualization of what the traditional world language classroom looks like. Meaning, for a lot of current world language teachers, a proficiency-oriented approach is probably not how you were taught the language or not how you learned the language, if it's the case that you learned it in school. And if you're a native speaker of the language that you're teaching, then it's also probably not the way you learned your native language. So we can't just rely on what we know and what we've experienced ourselves. Thirdly, proficiency-based assessment doesn't always align with what is our current reality of testing and grading standards. It's a part of our lives and our jobs as language teachers that we have to give grades. But proficiency is more than just learning the material. So when we're working with the proficiency approach, we kind of have to look and see how we can find some cohesion or common grounds between the two. Here at CLET World Languages, we are big proponents of a proficiency-oriented approach, and all of our materials and programs for Spanish, French, German, and Italian help support teachers who are teaching for proficiency or want to get started teaching for proficiency. This spring, we launched our Proficiency-Based webinar series, which is a series of 4 webinars, with the one today being the last in the series. And here you can see the titles of the 3 previous webinars in the series. We've got our first one, Proficiency Essentials, Laying the Foundation for Success, which I think was back in February. Then our second one in March, Grammar and Vocabulary in Context, Building Proficiency Through Meaningful Use. Our third one, that was in April, Assessments that Empower Learning, a Proficiency-Based Approach. And then here we are today talking about harnessing technology to support proficiency-based learning. These webinars are all available on our website, the recordings from those sessions, and also on our YouTube channel to watch if you missed them or to watch them again if you'd like. And the one from today will also be uploaded as well to kind of round out the series. So before we dive into today's webinar, we thought we would do a brief recap of the key takeaways from those first 3 webinars in the series so that we're all on the same page. Starting with our first webinar, which laid the groundwork and defined several key terms and concepts for us. The first of which, of course, is proficiency itself. You might ask yourself, well, what is proficiency? Well, you've got a brief definition here that comes from ASCL in the revised guidelines, which states that proficiency is the ability to use language to achieve communication objectives. But when we talk about measuring proficiency, we can take a look at the guidelines and the levels put forth by ASCL that you can see here, or you might also be familiar with the Common European Frameworks levels, which are the A1, A2, B1, B2, and so on and so forth. The important thing to note is that proficiency is a scale. So it's not the case that we are proficient or are not proficient in the language, or rather we're more or less proficient in any type of language. It's a range. And then each of these ranges, each of these levels is going to have its own characteristics. And one of the ways that we can kind of learn about what those characteristics are is to take a look at those performance descriptors, which is another resource. And here we can see an example for that interpersonal mode, what it means, right? What learners who are at each of these levels, what they look like. Another way that proficiency can be conceptualized is through the can-do statements. And we see an example here of what those look like at the novice and intermediate level. And it's basically a list, right, of communicative tasks and functions that learners are able to do if they're at that proficiency level. And then I want to give a special mention to the 3 modes of communication, because when we talk about proficiency, we're not necessarily talking about, can I speak fluently in a language? Do I speak without an accent? Or, I speak without making any errors? But we talk about it instead with respect to these 3 modes of communication: interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational, which are our larger contexts and scenarios in which we're using language to communicate and how successful we are in doing so. So when it comes to teaching within a proficiency-oriented framework, it's important to note that one of the core tenets is that grammar and vocabulary are no longer presented and taught in isolation as the subject matter of the language course, but rather they're presented and learned in communicative context. And they're the vehicle by which we communicate. And this is due to all of the years of research in second language acquisition, applied linguistics, which basically kind of conclude that this is the most effective way in order to foster those form meaning connections that are necessary to drive language acquisition. That's necessary if we want our students to retain and be able to use the language. And lastly, if we're teaching for proficiency, then we also need to implement assessments that measure students' proficiency and also incorporate some proficiency-based rubrics. And so in our 3rd webinar, we talked about proficiency-based assessment, and we took a look at different types of assessments. 2 of the ones that we focused on in that webinar were projects or tasks, and then also those integrated performance assessments or IPAs. But of course, we also have the more formal assessments that ACTFL puts out, such as the APPLE, the Actual Assessment of Performance Towards Proficiency in Language, and the OPI, the Oral Proficiency Interview. And so what we're going to be talking about today is taking a look at how we can round out this series on proficiency and use technology to really drive the development of our students' proficiency and also the development of their language. And so for that, I'm going to pass it over to Juanita.
Thank you, Sarah, and hello, everyone. I'm going to start with just talking about what do we mean, right, when we talk about technology, right? So what comes to mind for some people? That can be the latest AI tool or an app with fancy dashboards. And for others, it can be, a document camera or simply using a Google Slide. And the truth is that all of that counts. Right? So technology doesn't have to be cutting edge to be effective. It's really just any tool that helps us to enhance communication, deliver the content that we have for our students, and engage them in new ways. We know that that's like a never-ending project for us as teachers, right? So as Sarah mentioned, today we're not going to focus only on complex platforms or flashy innovations. We'll show some, flashy stuff as well, but we're here to also recognize the value of simple and familiar tools, right? Those true and tested tools that we've been using, right, for many years, some of us, right? But that can still make a big impact when we use them with a purpose. Right, so think of technology on a spectrum, right? So here we have just some examples, everything from an interactive PDF to a shared Google Doc or a Padlet, all the way to, AI generated support or speaking support, writing or speaking supports, right? So today, we really are looking to broaden this definition and revisit some of these tools that may be familiar with us for us to see how you're already using them, and then maybe provide some new ideas as well that can support proficiency-based learning specifically, right, in practical but also accessible ways. So in fact, why don't we just start with what you're already doing and using. So we have a quick poll here, and there are 2 ways that you can access it. So if you have a phone, you can scan the QR code, Or you can use a link that we will drop in the chat for you. Let's see. There we go. Thank you very much. There it is. So you can access either one of those two ways. And oh, I see some answers already. Right. So a little bit of everything, right? So from posting assignments to a lot of video and audio, interactive practice with quizzes. One person who is um, two for AI. Very good. All right, awesome. So we see quite a bit of variety, right? And one person who isn't using a lot of tech right now, and that's totally fine. Um, right? Wherever you are with technology. So I have one more question for you, and feel free to, keep adding your responses on this one. This next one, I just want to know, right, what tools you have found helpful in your teaching. So feel free to add any of those tools in the boxes there. You can add one or two or three. Okay. You know what I really love about this and you sharing your ideas, it just shows how diverse and flexible technology use can be, right? So you're using a lot of really neat tools, some that I've never heard of. So it's great to see sort of what everyone is doing, right? So again, what we're going to look at today is, right, no matter where you are, um, to explore how these tech tools can support proficiency, right? So feel free to keep adding your responses. We'll share these results with you as well. And we're going to go ahead and look at a few common barriers and perceptions that often shape how and when we use tech in the classroom, right? Um, here we go. Right. So as we see here, right, integrating tech isn't always easy, right? So a quick fun fact is, did you know that the average person spends over 2.5 hours a day on social media? That's a lot of time. And for Gen Z, so, I'm a millennial, an older millennial, but for the younger generation, Gen Z, which a lot of our students are, especially university students, some high school students, that's closer to 3 hours, right? So all of us are clearly using technology all of the time. But when it comes to using tech for teaching and learning, right, things don't often translate directly, right? So things can get a little bit more complicated there. And so sometimes it could be, a time issue. We simply don't have enough time to explore new tools or figure out how to make them work in a meaningful way in the classroom, right? There's also the challenge of training and support. Even when the tools are available, we might not get, the professional development we need to use them effectively, or we have to figure it out on our own. And, on top of lesson planning and everything else that is on our plate, as a teacher, who has time for that? Cost is another very real barrier, right? So if you taught during the pandemic, we saw, right, a lot of really fun and neat tools sort of emerge during that time. They were all free back then. And now most of them have moved on to, subscriptions or licenses, and their free versions are really, quite limited. And if you're, trying to use, cool tools, those costs can add up really quickly, whether that's you paying for the tool on your own or, trying to get your institution to fund it can be complicated as well. Right. On top of that, there's that generational difference, right? So I think our comfort level really varies. Um, and then, as I mentioned earlier, right, even if we are using technology every day, all of the time, that doesn't necessarily translate into the classroom. And then lastly, there are a lot of misconceptions surrounding tech, right? So for example, that it's just used for games or that it replaces good teaching, that our jobs are at risk, right? When in fact, the goal isn't to replace us as teachers, but rather to support what we do best, right? So we're still the experts in these situations. And so as we move into the next section, we're going to really focus on the heart of the matter, right? The core challenges that we face when trying to use tech to support proficiency specifically, right? And how we can address these challenges in practical ways.
Great, thank you. And so exactly as she said, we're going to dive in now to kind of three core challenges, things that might occur to you when you're teaching for proficiency and how we can use technology to kind of help us solve that challenge. And you'll notice that our solutions are designed to really leverage technology that you probably already have access to, and that doesn't cost you any additional money, tools you might already be familiar with. And we designed this on purpose because we want to kind of communicate that you don't even have to be very super tech savvy. I would not say that I'm super tech savvy, but you can still use it to your advantage in the classroom. And so our first core challenge is limited time for practice and real communication. And one thing that we all know and probably have all experienced is that learning a new language requires a lot of time. And if we are learning a new language in the context of the classroom, we don't necessarily get that much time. And so if we think about kind of the standard typical amount of time that teachers get to spend with our students, we can do some very quick basic math, which I've kind of done some of it for us here. And so if we're looking at, a typical college semester, let's say, 3 50-minute classes per week over 15 weeks, that amounts to 2,250 minutes or 37.5 hours. And then we can compare that with a typical kind of high school context. Similarly, let's say, five 50-minute periods over 36 weeks for the full year, that comes out to 9,000 minutes or 150 hours. Also knowing that sometimes you don't even have all that time, you have to do assessments and there's other things that are at play there. You might have more time than that, you might have less time than that based on your context and your scenario with your students, but either way, it's not a lot of time in general. And so that means that our goal then, as proficiency-oriented teachers and working in that approach, is going to be to really try and intentionally maximize our instructional time, the time that we do have with our students in class, and focus on meaning-based activities across those three modes of communication. And so we've got a couple of ways that you can do that, starting with something that's very basic, which is that we can kind of intentionally structure our curriculum and our courses to have those grammar and vocabulary practice activities outside of class to really allow us to leave class time to focus on those communicative meaning-based activities. And in terms of tech tools, your language learning platform or your LMS is really going to be ideal for this. And so we've got an example here. And so this page comes from Reporteros 1, which is a Spanish book for middle and high school. And this particular page comes from Unit 4 out of Unit 6. So we're a little more than halfway through that first year. And we can see that this unit is about school and it's about routines. And the can-do statement for these two pages is I can talk about school subjects and describe schedules. And so what we've got going on here for those who don't speak Spanish is we've got a schedule here from a student, all his different classes that he has throughout the week. And this is really the meat, the context for all of these activities that follow, some of which are reading comprehension activities, others are interpersonal speaking activities, there's some cultural comparisons, and a little bit of game built in there. And then in terms of grammar and vocabulary, obviously we have, class subjects. That's a lot of our new vocabulary. And then the grammar that's being kind of focused besides time is also going to be those stem changing verbs. Particularly for Spanish, the one that they're highlighting is empezar, because students need that to talk about when their classes begin in this context. And so as a teacher, if you're doing these two pages, you might want to incorporate some dedicated vocabulary and grammar practice here to help students with those new words and with those structures. So you can see a couple of examples here. But if we were to do all these three activities and kind of add them into the day or even more activities into the day, that's going to take up a lot of our time. And it can also shift our focus in class from those more communicative activities that I'll highlight for you in a second to these kind of more grammar and vocabulary drill driven activities. And so easy solution is to use your LMS, use your language platform, and kind of build out these activities and have time for them outside of class for your students as homework, additional practice, whatever works for you in your scenario. And then what that means is it leaves you time to focus on some more kind of complex activities that your students are really going to benefit from having you as the teacher there to kind of lead and just kind of help the students discover and work together. And so you can see the first one I highlighted here is a cultural comparison activity. And so it says, what subjects do you have in common with Juan Jose, who is the student whose schedule this is, and he's from Colombia. Which subjects do you have in common with him? Which ones do you have different? And so that's a great activity to kind of build out and work and elaborate on in class. We also culminate this kind of series of activities in the one that says number 2 here, which is saying, do you prefer your schedule or Juan Jose's schedule, and why? Kind of justify your answer. And that's great because this is our communicative anchor. This is why we're doing all of this. So, we're analyzing his schedule, learning what these subjects are, so we can see what we have in common, we can see what's different, and we can kind of learn about ourselves and make those decisions. What do I prefer? What would I prefer? And we have kind of an extension activity here at the bottom, where students get to come up with their own schedule for either a really great day or a really horrible day. And this is actually direct practice and modeling for the final project that students have in this chapter, which would be a proficiency-based assessment that you could implement here. And so you really want to make sure that you have class time to work on that with your students. An additional time-related challenge is that language learning can take place at different rates, at different paces, and students in the same class might not be at the exact same proficiency level. This is very common in those intermediate level classes, and you guys might have experienced this. I definitely did when I was teaching. And so another way we can leverage our language learning platform or our LMS is to build out different learning paths for students and to help us set up a progression of difficulties. And so I've got a couple of examples here to illustrate what I mean by that. And so this example comes from Repertoire Francophone 1, and it's Unit 5. So it's a French program for middle and high school students. And our can-do statement up here, I have to move the little bar so I can see it, says, I can describe and compare eating preferences. So we've got an interpretive reading activity here, and talking about food. And there's a lot of new vocabulary here. I always felt that way when teaching the food units. There's just so many words, so many new words. I always joked with my students that, a lot of times I have to look up words on the menu in English. So of course there's going to be words that you're going to encounter in your second language related to food that you're not going to know. And so as you're planning and preparing this, you might want to plan in advance to work in some differentiation and kind of personalized learning for your students for this day in class to kind of really help them with all of that vocabulary. And so depending on the program you use, you might have to create those activities, or you might have some assistance. In this particular case, Repertoire Francophone comes with pre-made differentiation worksheets and activities to help you set up those paths. So I went in and pulled out a couple to illustrate. And you can see this extra activity here that we would do before the reading to kind of activate some vocabulary about eating preferences and to kind of give them some very easy practice with some of the vocabulary. Your students might not know, right, the difference between being a vegetarian and a vegan and kind of what that means. And so you can kind of work on that before they go into the reading. It's also got an extra kind of writing, an alternate writing activity here that provides some extra scaffolding for students and a little model. And there is even an extra activity that's not in the student book that's labeled this défi, this challenge activity that you see here. And so we can leverage our technology to build out multiple paths for our students in the same class and achieve the same learning objectives. This is my very, very simple flow chart to illustrate that for you visually. Speaking of technology, I used Canva for this, and I'm a very basic user in Canva. But the 3 different colors of the arrows represent those 3 different paths. So our pink arrows are kind of what's in the student book, kind of your baseline path. Our red arrows take you through those extra differentiated activities, provide that extra scaffolding and support, and our yellow um, adds in that extra challenge activity. And so to illustrate this, I'm going to take you over onto our platform here. The KWL Hub, I've got it brought up. And so what I could do, if I'm using technology and I have my students on devices in the class, and I want to build out these personalized learning paths, is I could create those 3 different paths here on the platform. And so this is the path for the red arrows. And you can see here, I've selected, I'm in my book, Repertoire Francophone 1. I've selected a couple of those activities from the book itself. And then I'm also selecting a couple of activities from those differentiation activities that we saw. And if I do that and I create those 3 different paths, you see classwork group 1, group 2, and group 3. What I can do is kind of use my knowledge of my students and assign them to these different groups. And all of my students are working on the same content, the same reading, they're practicing the same vocabulary, but they've each got a little bit of a personalized learning path. And they're not going to be necessarily aware, right, that they've been given these different paths. And so I think that's a really cool way to kind of build that out and to use technology. Go back over here. And then another way, the last way here to play around with these types of activities would be to set up a progression of difficulty throughout your unit or throughout the year. And 2 ways that you could do that would be by manipulating multiple attempts and by incorporating timed activities. And so when we think about multiple attempts, I think it's very standard that we want to give our students multiple attempts for a lot of homework or classwork or practice because we want them to do it as many times and get the right answer. It's, formative learning. But one thing that we could do would be to use those multiple attempts. And let's say we give our students, 6 attempts at the beginning of a unit, just making up a number. And then by the end of the unit or the end of the chapter, that number of attempts has decreased. And now they only get 2 attempts or 1 attempt. And this is kind of a natural way that we can be holding our students more accountable to learning the vocabulary, to learning the grammar, to practicing it, and kind of pushing them along that learning path and also, their proficiency development. They have to kind of advance, right? And then you can also do that with timed activities. And so I think one of the things that students struggle with is being able to speak in class, kind of off the cusp. And that's kind of our goal for them, right? Is that they can just use their language organically. But that's not just going to happen without practice. And I know all of my students loved to write down every single thing that they were going to say before they said it and then just kind of read what they had written. And so one way that we can kind of help combat that and get our students to be more comfortable speaking is if you have these kind of recording activities that you see here. This one asks you, what are your favorite places in your city or your town? So you could assign this to your students. We can see that there's already a time limit of 3 minutes in the activity, meaning the recording itself can't be longer than 3 minutes. But in our assignment settings, I have time limit minutes. I could say, okay, the total for this activity is 6 minutes, let's say. So they open it up and they have 6 minutes and then it's going to close. And so in that 6 minutes, they have to read, the prompt, figure out what they're going to say and record it and submit it. And you could make that longer, you could make that shorter. You could also do a progression of time where they get more time at the beginning of the unit and then less time towards the end of the unit. And this is a nice way to slowly kind of be pushing them to develop their language skills and to get them more comfortable kind of using it on the fly. Very simple with tech tools that we already have, but that you might not have thought about using in this way. Okay, so we're going to move on now to our second challenge, which is going to be the need for relevant and authentic activities. And so just very briefly, recall that our definition of proficiency is using language to achieve communication objectives. And communication can have a lot of different definitions. I put one here that's kind of a modified hybrid version of Bill Van Patten's, which is that communication is the exchanging of information or ideas through the interpretation and negotiation of meaning in a shared system. Or in other words, we communicate for a purpose, right? We don't talk just to talk, right? Right now I'm talking because I want to share these ideas with you all and in hope that you find them useful and that you can try them out in your classrooms. And you all are listening because probably you have the same goals, right? You want to find some tips and see if there's things that you can use in your classes. And so that reason, that purpose for communication in a proficiency-oriented approach needs to be present, needs to be very explicitly stated, and also needs to be authentic. So our question then is, how can we incorporate that purpose into some traditional tasks and activities so that they are more authentic and promote students' proficiency development. And we're going to take a look specifically at two different kind of traditional tasks that involve technology to do so. And the first one is discussion boards. In particular, looking at discussion boards to work on interpersonal writing skills with our students in class. So we're going to take a quick 30 seconds here for some reflection. Feel free to share your answers in the chat with everyone. But have you used a discussion board activity with your students? And how did it turn out? Did it turn out the way that you wanted it to? So we'll do a little quick pause so you can think if you'd like to share an example. And I'll also open up the chat to see if anybody has any ideas. And while you're thinking and reflecting, I will share my own personal experience. Both as a student and as a teacher, discussion boards were a very big part of both of those paths in my life. And as a teacher, I love setting them up discussion boards for my students if they, were doing a final project and they had to do a video or create or write something, and they had to share it with their class and comment on each other's posts. And I always had very high expectations for it. But at the end of the day, I was like, no, my expectations are not being met, right? What was happening often was that my students were just kind of commenting with sort of stock phrases, right? Like, oh, I like it, great job, or I agree with you. That they could have copied and pasted on any of the posts, right? And not necessarily something that was specific to, the post that they were trying to comment on. And so I realized, like, man, I gotta think about this. Because this discussion board isn't really doing much to help drive or solidify their language development and their proficiency development. And so that's our challenge, right? And that's what I wanted to share with you, is how can we craft discussion board activities to foster meaningful use of language in that interpersonal writing. And so again, a lot of you, thank you for sharing in the chat. There's a lot of different tools that you can use to do these discussion, interpersonal, can be writing or speaking. I'm going to focus on writing here. But definitely thank you for sharing. And so we've got kind of a little list of broad ideas and suggestions categorized as some do's and don'ts here to help us with this. And so our first do is to add a communicative purpose to this discussion board activity, right? Why are we asking our students to post something and to comment on each other's posts? What is the point? And then thinking about this, if you want to implement, multiple discussion board type activities throughout your course, you could relate this to real life and kind of bring in what students are already experiencing. As Funny just said, we spend a lot of time on social media. So you could bring in a social media post and then take a look at the comments and say, okay, well, what type of comments do we have here? Which of these comments are successful, are good comments? Which are bad comments? Why do we think people feel compelled to comment, right? Like, what's their communicative purpose? Why are they doing that? And we could also do the same thing with our posts, right? If our goal is to have people comment on our post, right, to get engagement, to get the views, right, and get the clicks these days, what is a successful post? And you can engage in this conversation with your students and have them even come up with the ideas and kind of contribute to the rubric in that sense of how it's going to be graded. And it really gives them a stake in the game. Our second do is to give students a specific task to complete through commenting. And so, for instance, maybe everybody submitted their favorite recipe or a recipe on the discussion board. And so students have to go through and read the different recipes and comment on the one that they most want to try and say why. Or the one that they think would be a crowd pleaser if there's, a very big diverse group of people. Or the recipe that they think is the easiest or the most time consuming to make. We can also add a challenge or a gamification aspect. And so you could challenge your students and say, every post needs to have 2 comments. I don't care how you get there. You guys need to work and figure that out. But as a class, this is your goal. And so you either succeed or kind of fail together. You could also make them worth different points. So we could say, a comment is worth 1 point. If you ask them a relevant question, that's worth 2 points. If you respond to somebody else's comment, that is 0.5 points or whatever it might be. And students' goal is to get 10 points in this discussion board. And so however they get to 10 points, they can pick and choose their path via these different options. You could also make it a scavenger hunt, right? We have 6 recipes. You need to comment on all 6, but comment on the one that you like the most, comment on the one that is the most difficult to make, and so on and so forth. And we can also add a third layer, right? The original poster can also respond to the comments that they get, because that interpersonal aspect goes back and forth, and we really want to foster that in the classroom. Now, some don'ts, right? Don't specify the grammar and vocabulary that students need to use in their comments, because if we really want to foster the communicative aspect of this, we don't want them to necessarily practice specific grammar or vocabulary, but we want them to communicate an idea, something that they have. But you could add that in, and you could comment yourself on students who are using grammar and vocabulary, give them some bonus points, or count it into that point system of the game if you're doing that. But we want students to share their ideas however they can and not necessarily limit them. And then, of course, don't make the instructions very long and complicated. So I think, the standard for me as a student was you need to post and then comment on 2 students' posts. Barely no instructions. Not very successful. We could, take that to the extreme and then add a very long list of instructions. You need to make a post and comment on this many posts, and it must be this many words, and use this grammar and vocabulary. You need to ask a question and say whether you like it. And then it becomes a checklist of things that students need to do, and still kind of pulls us away from that communication area. And so here's a concrete example. Let's say we're going back to that example in Spanish where we were looking at the schedules. And so you're asking students to post a daily schedule, right? A routine during the week, a day, whatever it might be. And so some ways that we could make this more proficiency oriented in terms of making it more communicative in nature is that we could have each student be assigned, or groups of students be assigned, specific roles. So somebody takes the teacher role, the friend role, the parent role, the doctor role, the student guidance counselor, whatever those roles might be. And they have to respond to the schedule from that perspective, right? So if I'm a parent viewing, my kid's school schedule, what might I say about it? Versus if I'm a teacher, versus if I'm a friend, right? I'm looking at my friend's schedule, and so on and so forth. You could also, instead of varying the roles, right, you could keep each student as a student, they're themselves, but they have to vary the different types of comments, right, the function of communication that they're doing with their comment. So maybe they have to give advice, and then the next time they have to provide support, the next time they have to ask a question, the next time they have to validate somebody's ideas and opinions. And so we're practicing the different communicative natures that we see play out in discussion boards. And as a fun add-on kind of game aspect, if we take that activity that I mentioned where students have to create a schedule for a good day or a bad day, you could have them do that. And then all the students have to comment and say whether I think, oh, this is a great day because A, B, and C. This is a horrible day because, wow, you have math and then Spanish and then chemistry and then philosophy and then I don't know what, right? And everybody's going to have their own opinion about what's good or bad. They can comment and then they can kind of reveal, right? Did we get it? And do we agree or disagree on what's a good day and what's a bad day? So lots of fun ideas, little tweaks to make it more successful. And then the second example here is very similar, kind of something that you probably have done. And we actually saw that in the little survey that you guys filled out in terms of how you're already using technology. A lot of you said that you're doing videos, is to kind of do a social media style video to work on some presentational speaking skills with our students. And so this plays to that idea of we want to engage our students in their interests and then also provide authentic contexts that are relevant for them. And we all know, right, social media is everywhere these days. And you can see this graphic that I pulled from the Pew Research Center, which compares an interview from 2014 to 2022. And we can see that YouTube, 95%, right? Our young kids, our Gen Z, Gen Alpha, they are all over YouTube watching videos. TikTok was the second highest views, also lots of videos. So videos are where it's at right now, right? Everybody's doing that. They're used to it. It's an authentic, it's a real life context. And so we can want to try and take advantage of that real life context, something we think our students are into and they have this knowledge of, to do some projects and activities in class. And so I've got an example for you from my own personal experience again. This is when I was teaching Spanish at a university, and this was our project, right? You work for a travel agency and are creating a TikTok video to advertise a special trip, 48 hours in a city. Since I was teaching Spanish, it was 48 hours in a Spanish-speaking city. And so my question for you all is, that was the prompt, right? There wasn't much else to it. what do you guys think happened? Do you think my students turned in videos that would realistically get put on TikTok that would kind of fit with that authentic context? Real quick in the chat, you can vote yes or no. Two maybe yeses, and then a no. Yeah, so we're kind of split. And I think that I had one group of really good students who were very creative, but everybody else did not. College students. So also this is right after the pandemic, so everybody made a PowerPoint or Google Slides presentation and then went into Zoom and screen shared and then recorded themselves kind of going through the presentation. So very kind of academic minded presentation there. And so, I was, as a teacher, disappointed, but then also felt like, this is maybe my fault. And this was a shared project that we all had to do. Everybody who's teaching this level. So, and I was like, yeah, maybe we needed to change some things to make this work. And so when we think about that, right, if we want to ask our students to create a video and we're telling them this should be a video that you could put on YouTube or on TikTok or an Instagram reel or whatever it might be, we really need to consider the context and hold our students accountable to it. And so both of those things weren't really done in this scenario. Although I think now, right, I've seen a lot of travel blogs and a lot of things on Instagram because I'm a millennial. That of people who are walking around Mexico City or walking around Paris or whatever and showing you what they ate in a day or what they did. So it is something that could go on social media, right? But the prompt needed to be tweaked to really fit that, and we had to hold students accountable to that. And so the rubric did not really incorporate anything that, like, if you're not creating a TikTok video, then you're going to lose points. So it was really hard to hold them. Which is why if you're going to do something like this, you want to incorporate that context into your rubric. Right? Did the students achieve the nature of the tasks? So did you make a TikTok video? If you're screen sharing a PowerPoint, you probably didn't. I mean, I'm not really on TikTok, but like I don't think that's what students do, or people do, right? Not students on TikTok. But because I'm not on TikTok, right, this also is a great way where you can incorporate your students and their ideas into the rubric and allow them to create the criteria for this, allow them to be the experts and say, yeah, I know what makes a video successful on TikTok. It's these 5 things. And so we incorporate that into the rubric. And then also provide a model for the students. If it's something that realistically could be put on TikTok or put on YouTube or wherever, then you should be able to find a pseudo example of it for them to use as a model. And so kind of parallel to that, those don'ts, right? We don't want to force the context to fit the project if it doesn't work. We don't want to require, again, that very specific language use because it needs to align. And so if it's on TikTok and it's something very informal, we shouldn't be asking our students to be using a formal register in their videos. And that might be kind of what we're aiming for if we're coming from that classroom context. And then, of course, we don't want to make every project social media oriented just because we know it's right? We have to see, does it fit? And when it does fit, yes, let me really maximize the potential of this in this authentic context to help drive their proficiency. And so with that, I'm going to pass it over our third challenge back to Juanita.
Thank you. Yeah, so our next challenge is one we all know well, right? So how do we meet a wide range of learner needs and give meaningful feedback, especially without burning ourselves out, right? How can technology really support us in this, right? So when we teach for proficiency, as Sarah, right, has been saying, we are trying to meet students where they are and help them grow, right? So that includes differentiation and providing timely and actionable feedback. But it also, right, can feel like a lot to manage, right, as a teacher. And so, right, that can giving feedback can be quite time-consuming part of our job. So, right, that's where perhaps tech can help us, right? So, by doing these 3 things, which will I'll focus on a little bit in a few moments, right? So personalize the learning experience with which Sarah, right, has already showed us some examples of that. Um, it also can help us empower student choice, which goes a long way in terms of engagement, right? And make feedback more efficient and more meaningful so that we are meeting our goals, right? So um, you've already seen, right, a great example of how independent learning paths, either through your learning platform or your learning management system, can help differentiate instruction. And I think that's super worth mentioning, right, because those are tools that your institution has already paid for, you have access to, and it does take a little bit of time upfront for you as a teacher, right, to create this. But then, right, it really helps you to deliver the content in this more personalized way, right? For your students. Um, Technology can also help us incorporate audio, video, visuals, right, seamlessly in our lessons. I think, a lot of us have been doing that really well for some time, right? And just with even better technology, we have more access to a variety of sources and resources that really enrich what we can do in the classroom, right? Really opens up a lot of doors. I just wanted to put that on here so we don't forget, right, all of the things that we are probably already doing and that we can continue to do to help our students. Right, so I'll spend a little bit more time on the second bullet point, right? So empowering student choice, right? So technology helps us vary the mode or modality, for example, of a task, right? So all that means is that instead of everyone submitting the same product, right, students can choose to write or record or design or even create visual content depending on what plays to their own strengths or interests, right? And the tools, many of them are already available to students, right? Whether it's Google tools or YouTube, again, your learning management systems, so Canvas, Blackboard, D2L, or other creative platforms, right? You all mentioned several of them in the word cloud, right? So some more examples, right? Canva, Adobe Express, Padlet is also a really neat tool to sort of collect student brainstorming student ideas, right? And so what's important here, right, is that the communicative goal stays the same, right? So when we give our students these options, right, they have multiple paths to express their ideas, to show you what skills they have, what they've acquired along the way, right? We keep that focus on proficiency. We're just giving students a sense of ownership in the process, right? So let's look at an example. So here is a project. It's a level 3 Spanish book, so we can expect it to be, for students at the intermediate level. And what they have to do is I'll blow this up a little bit, right? The context is that you student is collaborating on a digital magazine, and they have to, talk about their preferences. This activity is also related to technology, so students, are talking about that, and so I thought this was a neat example. But the product which students have to create is an infographic about applications that the students in the class really value, right? And so that infographic is what they have to produce. And so just keeping that in mind, there are many ways that students can do that, right? So this, the original assignment has some ideas, some steps, right? You can see at the bottom, a bit of an example or a model for students, right? And so I just want to highlight some alternative options, right? So we can go low tech, and perhaps students are really great, right, at drawing. So they prefer just an illustrated poster or a video presentation, or perhaps it's a student that feels more comfortable speaking, right? And instead of designing. And so they might want to produce a podcast, right? Or an audio report or slide deck, right? If you're one of Sarah's students. Um, Um, right? And again, so the possible tools, right? There's a variety. The pencil and paper, if you wanted to, and if you still want a digital submission, students can take a picture of what they illustrate and submit that to you, right? Or scan it. For the video presentation, right? Most students will have a phone, which they can use very easily to create a video, as well as right for the audio. And then for the podcast idea, right, we don't want to focus only on the speaking. So you would ask them to complement that with a transcript or an outline, right, of what they're saying to sort of complement the product as a whole, right? And that slide deck as well, right? Students have a lot of different options, everything from Google Slides to PowerPoint, the really fun ones, Canva, or if you're super like design oriented Prezi, right? And each slide can act as a section of the infographic, right, with text and images. And so again, right, our students just have a variety of options, and they're still working towards the same goal, right? So with that variety, right, that brings us to our next point, which is feedback, right? So once we get all of these beautiful projects, we have to provide feedback. And so when they're producing more personalized and varied work, right, how do we keep up with giving feedback that's actually helpful and supports their proficiency growth, right? And so let's take a look at first what Nickel, Budke, and Strauss say about feedback in relation to, right, a proficiency-oriented approach or proficiency-oriented feedback. Right, so they say proficiency-oriented feedback is the most effective when it focuses on meaning making, right? It involves the learner actively and it supports iterative improvement. So it's not just about what's wrong, it's about how to move forward in real communication, right? And so this is the type of feedback that we want to provide, right? And so the three components are that the student will learn, right? The feedback states where the learner is, right? So where are they going? And it also promotes thinking about how to get there, right? So you as a teacher, as a provider of feedback, don't tell them how to get there, right? Necessarily, you guide them to sort of self-reflection. And I wanted to provide an example of what that might look like. Here it is. If we can think about maybe a project similar to the one that we just saw, this infographic, right? Or something for for the similar level, right? So you could say you shared some great facts. How might you show why it is important to you, right? So whatever the topic is, what phrases could you use to express that? Right? Always, right, keeping in mind that we have right, these goals of these proficiency goals, or that we have these targets, right, that we're setting for our students, right? And so our criteria for exceeding, meeting, and developing, right? Our first comment, you shared some great facts, would be what the student has achieved, right, in the meeting section. And then you want to push them, right, to that exceeding category, and you give them, right, a prompt that will have them think about how I can do that, right? And so here in this type of providing this type of feedback, we can really push students to move forward, right? So we're looking at what they are able to do, what they're doing well, and pushing them forward a little bit, right? So all of that, of course, is going to require effort and time, right? But that's our goal, right? So as teachers who are working towards proficiency, we want to provide meaningful feedback, right? That's not solely focused on accuracy. So how can technology help us do that, right? So we can deliver timely feedback that is much more targeted, right? So just as the example that we just saw, we can use different types of tools, right? So you can give a voice memo, right? Or visual tools to help you preserve tone. I really like that, and I'll show you an example of a tool that you can use to do this, right? And then create opportunities for revision, not just evaluation, right? Because if a student receives your comment and then there's nothing else to do, right, what good is that prompting question going to do, right? And so a really important part of this is that feedback is really a process, and students have to be involved in that process and in their learning. And giving this type of feedback will foster that. Right, so here's one example. We're starting low tech, right? This is an interactive PDF, right? There's a checklist which students can use as a sort of self-reflection, right? Am I meeting the goals or not? And this type of tool, right, you can provide to students via your LMS. You can email it to them. Like, these are the things that you should be doing, right, or focused on to be meeting the goals, perhaps how to exceed the goals, and the students can use this for themselves, but also if they're working in a group, right? Also a valuable tool to use with their peers. Here we have a same type of low tech tool, but for us as instructors or teachers, right? We have focused on that project, right? This is an example of a project specific rubric, but you can create a more general rubric, which I'll come back to in just a second, right? But here I have the criteria, and by having a set rubric, right, in this type of format, it allows for me to, very quickly mark, where the student is. At the bottom, there's a space for teacher comments. I know this is very tiny, right? But in the first box, I put that glow comment, which is, here's where you are. I have identified where you have achieved, right, or met the expectations. And in the next steps and strategies, that's where I've put the grow comment, which is that prompting question, which invites students to think about what they've done and what they could do, right, to boost it up next time or in a revision, right, depending on what step you are in the process, right? Again, low tech, but super useful, right? I typed directly into this. If you do have a learning management system, again, this takes a little bit of work up at the front end, but then once it's created, it's there for you to use, right? Reuse, clone, or copy, and edit, right? So here we have an example that I did not create from Blackboard, right? If you have used that before, and one that I created in Canva and in Canvas, I'm sorry. And for this one, right, you can see that I even left it at 0 points because I'm focused only on, right, the proficiency goals, right? I'm not worried about points for this particular project. I'm really just looking at what my students are doing, and that's the type of feedback that I want to provide at this stage, right? So fully customizable. You can set this up, right? And then once your students submit, you're able to use this as a tool to provide feedback, right? Over and over again. So now I want to show you something that's outside of the platform. So I had mentioned some voice type feedback, which I really like. And so it's a really quick video of me explaining. Sarah, if you can, yep, there we go. You're muted, so maybe I can't hear it, but
Mm. Can you hear it now?
no. But I can talk about it. Um, so
Let me
okay.
try again. Give me 1 second. Let me.
All right. So as you're doing it, I can just start talking. All right. So
Okay.
what you see on the screen is a Google document, right? So I actually really like Google Docs because it's a collaborative document that students can work on in real time, right, with each other, but also I can have access to it and I can, see their progress, and then provide feedback as well, right? I think it's a very simple tool, but one that can be super effective, especially as we invite them to revise, right? So that this in a Google Doc, all of these things can sort of live in the same place. Um, and so what you're seeing here in the background is, the sample student submission, which is not at all done. But I'm using a tool called Mote to provide feedback. And so I've recorded my voice to give them feedback, right? That glow and grow comment for them, based on what they've submitted. And so this tool allows me, again, to record my voice and save it. And then it adds a link to the document. And then when students click the link, which you'll see in just a second, they get a pop-up and they can listen to my voice message, right? And I think that is a super cool tool, right? Because, right, it preserves the tone, and often in words, right, in writing, that's very difficult to communicate. And we tend to be, right, empathetic feedback providers, but also they get to just, hear, the kindness or the firmness or, the tone in your voice, what it actually sounds like in the target language. This tool also provides a transcript of what you've said, so students can listen to it or they can read it, and it provides the transcript in multiple languages, right? So you can provide this feedback in the target language if you wanted to, right? So it's one that I really, really like. It's called Mote, right? And so we can go back to the slideshow, right? So I'll take,
Can you
it,
click through?
no, it didn't let me take back over, but maybe if
Okay,
you,
I can do it.
all right, thank you. All right, so here's just a close-up of what that looks like. And then in the next one, right, you see that I went old school and just added a comment. I think that's still super useful, right? You can add your comment there, your glow and grow, and have them revise it in the same document, right? Just give them the opportunity to correct. This tool, you can see it appears in the bubble as well. So you could provide additional voice comments. All right, so we have one more section, which is, I think, a hot topic. It's AI. I know we are at an hour, so some people might have to go. You will get an email with the recording later. If you're free for another few minutes, hang out with us and we'll talk about AI. So we're switching gears a little bit, right? Just to talk about this specifically, right? So first, we're going to talk about generative AI. So what is it? I thought we could just start there, right? So it's artificial intelligence, but artificial intelligence that can create content, right? So text, images, video, audio, code, and we've all seen examples of it. If you're a teacher, I'm sure you've dealt with it in your classroom in some regard, right? So some challenges that we see popping up are, of course, academic integrity, reduce critical thinking for students, right? That it obviously, right, it's a tool, so it cannot replace the human element, right? And especially in language learning, like that human element is so important, right? I just talked about tone and why that tool is helpful, um, right? Because everyday use, you can't really replicate that with AI, right? This tool is still new, so I think all of us are very much learning how we can use this in the classroom and use it effectively, but also ethically, um, right, with our students. So I have this here to sort of bust some AI myths. And okay, so we'll just go through them. The first one is perhaps one of the most important ones, right? It does not replace the teacher. So AI is a tool, it's not a teacher, right? We are still the experts, right? The AI tool doesn't have judgment, it doesn't have empathy, right? It's not an instructional design experts. We are those people, right? And that remains true. The second one, right? It doesn't replace the student voice. So the AI tool only outputs what you prompt it to do, right? So you still have to design a prompt that's going to produce what you want, what you would like it to. And that requires, some critical thinking. And the critical piece there, you can see teacher guidance, right? So that's an important element there. Using AI is cheating. Well, mostly, or it has the ability, yes, to be this, but it also has this other ability, right? You can use it ethically as a support tool. And I think we're sort of at a moment in time where we have no choice. We sort of have to embrace it as this and see what possibilities it provides to us in the classroom, right? Otherwise, I feel like it's a losing battle, right? So that means that we as teachers have to teach students how to use the tool, or at least how we expect them to use it and not use it in our classroom, right? But also be transparent about how you use it, right? If you use it, talk to them about what you're using it for. AI is only for writing tasks, so it's great at writing tasks, but you can use it for other activities or goals as well. So speaking, listening, interpretive reading, right? And there are always new and evolving tools, which right, will help us uh, do even more. And students already know how to use AI effectively. Well, we know that is not true, right? So the comfort with the tool varies. Students may know how to access it, right? But they probably need help in learning how to use it as a tool, right? Especially to grow their language skills, which is, what, we as language teachers are here to do. And so with that in mind, right, we're going to take a look at some activities that you could use AI with in your classroom. Just a quick note, we are coming out with a supplement. It's Reporteros Generative AI companion. So if you do use a Reportero series, I'll look out for that sometime this summer. I'm excited to take a look at that when that becomes available, right? So again, just looking at how we can use AI, right, to supplement what we're doing, not to replace it, because we know that's not happening. All right, so the first example is for creating extension activities, right? So as a teacher, right, I want to just look for additional activities, right, beyond what's in my textbook, or, I just want to add variety to my class. So in the prompt, I want to describe what I want, give it a little bit of context, right? I might want to consider, of course, the content, the level, the age group, and how it's going to be used in the class. And if I'm looking for a specific format, I want to provide it that information as well, right? So for this example, I want the AI tool to help me create riddles using the lesson vocabulary. And I believe that this is going to help my students learn or review the vocabulary in a different way, right? And there's no way I have time to write riddles for every single vocab word, right? So right, so here's an example of the prompt that I gave it, right? So I'm going to give you some Spanish words, right? Create 10 riddles in Spanish, and the answer to the riddle has to be one of the words that I've provided, right? Make sure that they're appropriate for students that are aged 14 to 18 years old, right? And at an intermediate level. I have a little asterisk there, right? Because, and a little note at the bottom, AI is not an expert in actual proficiency levels. You are, right? So we can ask it to give, produce a text or give sentences or whatever at this level, but it doesn't know what that level is, or its knowledge of what that level is very limited, right? Or it comes from perhaps native speakers only, right? We don't know where it comes from, right? And so just always keep that in mind, right? That even if you're including that information, you're going to have to revisit, because you're still the expert here. So here's what the AI tool populated, right? So AI is a great listener, so it restates the prompt, and then it gave me 10 riddles, right? Using the vocabulary that I provided. And so some of them are pretty good, right? Just a note here. So in the last one, right, we see soy valioso y brillante, pero mi búsqueda es agotante. Well, perhaps our students at Spanish level 3 might not know what that means, right? Because it's, I think, probably beyond an intermediate low level. So there, right, of course, you have to review what it gives you, but generally, it's very usable content, fun, quick, right? So what next? So I have this list, and really the options, are a lot, right? So what follow-up activities? You can use these as riddles during class, as a warm-up or as an activity. Students can create flashcards, right? You can make a matching game, create a Kahoot or an online quiz through your learning management systems. You can have students use these as models and have them write their own riddles, right? And a whole bunch of other things, right? Um, Another example, right? So using the same vocab list, right? I want it to create an engaging story, right? To help my students get additional input, right? So I told the AI, use the same vocab, but right, use write a story, provide a short story, use a superhero adventure context, including the theme for the given vocab. And I want to also tell it, right, the story will be read aloud in class by students and then acted out, right? Because that's what I would like to do with this. And so I tell it. And of course, again, AI is a great listener, so it repeats what I've asked it to do, and then it gives me its response. This is, kind of a long story, but I wanted to show you sort of the length of it, right? I think it's a perfect length for this level learner, right? You can see the bolded letters are the vocabulary. Um, and this is written in like a role play, right? So there's a narrator. The topic is eco-héroes al rescate. So in English, that's eco-heroes, so like ecological heroes to the rescue. So if you're like me or Sarah, or Sarah's age, think Captain Planet. Right? So there's the narrator, and then the superheroes, right, are Superagua or Super Water, Electrina, the Super Renovator, and then there's the villain, Señor Residuos, right? And so each of these characters has a line that has to do with, uh, being green and sustainable and responsible with the environment. And so, there's a little conflict where the villain, comes in and threatens everything, and then the heroes save the day and the earth. So I thought this was really cool. Right. And so I thought, what can I do next, right? So of course, I'm going to have my students act it out in small groups, right? I could also have them illustrate the story or create like a comic strip, right, to match the story. I can have them create a new eco-hero or a villain to add to the story, right? A lot of other possible extensions, but really easy way, right, to just add some excitement, something different to my class using the material that is already in the book, right? So it's the vocab list, right? So I'm not changing the theme or doing anything extra that is not related to what they've been seeing or they will see later, right? It's just a little bit of a twist. All right, so now let's see how we can use this with students, right? So the student is gonna get some assistance from the AI tool for class. And so in this activity, we're reading these 2 pages that have to do with like two places in Argentina. And so the activities here down at the bottom, these are like extension activities already. Ask students to compare these places with a place in their community. Kind of both are doing the same, right? So one is a cultural comparison, and then the other one is asking them, right, to um, be more creative with it, right? And do a promotional, some sort of promotional advertisement. All right, so I really like this, right? But I probably don't have a lot of time in this lesson to do all of that. And so I would like to use the AI to help me with this activity, right? So I want them to explore and share the information about local natural or nature areas. And I want to provide some additional input and structure to the activity. So I decide that AI can help me do that. All right, so they're going to create a social media, so Instagram specifically, post for a national park or other a natural area in their community, and then they're going to use AI to generate the text for the post caption for the Instagram post. All right, so what information do students need to provide the AI tool in order to get an appropriate text output? And here is the key to this activity, right? So, right, we've been talking a lot about how all of us are social media experts, right, including our students. And so they know, right, what makes an Instagram post effective, right? And so why not leverage that knowledge, that experience from outside of the classroom for this activity, right? And so in groups, right, you can have them come up with the prompt, right? And I think that that part is actually critical. So you have them discuss with each other, right, what is going to take in the prompt to get them the result that they want, right? And so some considerations, for example, might be, describe what you want and provide the context. You might want to tell them about the format or the genre, the language, you want it in Spanish, the purpose, is it for a specific audience? What level of detail should it include, and the length, right? And some of this might require trial and error, right? But again, they're working with their peers to come up with this prompt. And so, of course, they're working in the target language. There's negotiation involved, right? In trying to put the prompt together in Spanish to get the AI tool to deliver the desired result. All right. And so here's an example that I wrote. So I wrote the Spanish version and then the English version, which is exactly the same. The example I put in is Starved Rock. I'm from Illinois, and so that's a nature area here in my state, right? And so I've asked it to write an Instagram caption in Spanish to advertise that park, include some descriptions, activities that visitors can do, and then 4 to 6 hashtags in Spanish, because that's what would appear, right, in a Instagram post, most likely. All right, and so here's what it produced, right? Super cool Instagram caption, right? And so we see the text in Spanish where the students will produce this, right? And students can work on a different, nature area. They can select it on their own, or you can provide a list and they pick, right? And so in an ideal situation, they would have, different results. So what's next, right? So now that students have generated this text, right, you can ask them, right, is there anything that you would change, right? And so that's an important part of this, right? Because both you as a teacher, right, I mentioned that you as a teacher are the expert. We want to communicate that same message to our students, right? So the AI tool produced this, but that doesn't mean it's accurate. It doesn't mean it's perfect, right? We can't take it at face value. We need to analyze it, think about it critically, and then decide if it needs any adjustments before we sort of take it and do something else with it, right? Are there any words you aren't familiar with, right? So if we wanted to focus more specifically on the language, what are they? What do they mean? And then beyond that, right, we can, now that they have the prompt written up, find a photo to match the description. It could be, a personal photo or something that they find online. What other hashtags would you include? Going back to the activity in the textbook, let's do a cultural comparison now. So are there any similarities with the two places, right? With Starved Rock and the two places described in the book? If you have extra time or you have students who are like gung-ho, create a short video to go with the post, right? Or you can write your own caption, right? So using the two places that are in the textbook pages, use the AI produced text as a model, right, to write your own caption and create your own hashtags for one of those locations. Okay. Right. So, right, if you want to try any of these AI suggestions in your next lesson, I have just a quick list of things that you can play around with, right? So use AI to create a vocab activity or a guessing game, right? You have your vocab list, just put it in there. Use AI to create additional grammar focused activities, right? So Sarah mentioned a lot of those activities, right, that students need as independent practice, right? You want to, give them additional examples or use a different context. You can try an AI generated prompt for discussion in class. And I think, right, I would also invite you, right, to guide students in creating AI prompts, right? This is a skill that I think we as teachers, right, can help our students develop. It really lays the groundwork for them to use AI in a way that is responsible in the classroom, and also helps them, right, build their language skills, right? So any of these items I think would be, great activities for students to do. All right, Sarah?
All right. So thank you everybody for hanging out with us. We are wrapping up here. So quick takeaways. Obviously, we're hopefully we've communicated that the use of technology is something that should be carefully curated to enhance and assist with the proficiency-oriented approach in the classroom. And you don't need to reinvent the wheel. You can easily modify traditional tasks for a proficiency focus. So those are our discussion boards, language platforms, social media post type examples. And then Juanita talked about how effective feedback is part of the process, it's not the product. And technology can help us give that feedback to help build proficiency by focusing on our students' growth, supporting their revisions, and inviting them to stay engaged in the process. And then lastly, we ended with a little bit those amazing AI examples about how we can use it to enhance student engagement and language input or language output when used purposely. And so thank you everybody so much. Juanita, there was one question for you about which AI tool you used to generate those prompts. And before she answers us, we just want to let you know that we love to support teachers. So please check out our website and see everything that we offer kind of as part of our learning community, webinars like these, training sessions, conferences, events, and also kind of personalized professional development. And then the examples that you saw today came from our reporters series. And I believe we put the link in the chat if you wanted to check that out further. So thank you. Oops, I clicked on that link. And so here it took me to our webpage. But I'm going to stop sharing and then let Juanita answer that question about which AI tool she used.
Yeah, so I put it in the chat also, but it was just Chat GPT, the latest model. And I wanted to keep things simple, so I did everything in that one tool. A lot of platforms and learning management systems are incorporating AI into their platforms as well. So that would be something to explore. But I wanted to just use something that's free and accessible to everyone. And so that's the one that I picked.
And so far, we don't seem to have any additional questions, so maybe we can wrap this up with that. So once again, I would just really like to thank you, Sana and Juanita, for the presentation, and everyone for your attention and for being here until this moment. And yes, we really hope to see you on our next webinars and that you have a very nice evening.
Great. Thank you so much, everybody.
Thank
Thank you.
you.